Many of our people have been posting and sharing the biblical quote that we perish for a lack of knowledge. But we perish not by the lack of knowledge, but instead most because we've been taught false knowledge. False knowledge is worse to the mind than a mind that has not been fed false knowledge. Because an ignorant mind without false knowledge will continue to search to find the truth that ultimately frees the mind. But a mind that has been fed false knowledge, believing that the false knowledge is true, stops searching for the truth and therefore becomes mentally enslaved by the false knowledge. To our own detriment, this is what has been done to millions of our people that have been fed false knowledge by white oppressive forces. White oppressive forces have spread so much false knowledge into the collective minds of our people that millions are mentally enslaved and they fight against those who try to free their minds. Usually people have the right to believe whatever they choose to believe, but it does not include the oppressed. If the oppressed wants to liberate himself, because if our understandings of our plight and condition are flawed, then all of our liberating strategies that stems from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. We must function based upon what is true in order to liberate ourselves. This is why those who know must teach. African proverb. Within this video, I'm going to demonstrate that the beliefs and behaviors that exist amongst many of our people that are presently being misdiagnosed as being the results of a silly slave syndrome myth are instead actually the direct and deliberate results of disinformation propaganda campaigns that are being constantly and systematically fed into our collective minds by white oppressive forces. More specifically, by white social engineering scientists and white propagandists. As a means of protecting their white society from the disruption of massive unified black retribution, those white government employees feeds propaganda into our communities that keeps us thinking and behaving in ways that are against our own self-interest and that instead serves and protects the interests of their white society. Through their monopoly over information and media images that are repetitively being fed into our minds, they've shifted black collective aggressions away from their white society and they've redirected it against ourselves. It's the true reason why nowadays, when the subject of black liberation is mentioned, many black people automatically respond by saying they don't want to hear that black liberating crap. We're our worst enemies. It's the true reason why countless numbers of us constantly makes negative, unfounded statements about ourselves collectively that we ourselves cannot actually confirm. It's also the reason why many of us now insist that we're our worst enemies and we revere our oppressors in spite of a brutally horrific history and reality of the contrary. This disclosed mindset and collective state that exists amongst black people is much too widespread to be coincidental. It's not. It's by deliberate design. It's always by deliberate design when the oppressed starts thinking exactly as the oppressors wants them to think. The collective minds of large targeted populations are easily manipulated when they're unaware of what's being done to them. To our detriment, this is the hidden truth of our plight and condition. Given the white society's long-standing history of racism, violence, exploitation, and discrimination against the black population, is how they secretly protect their white nation from massive unified black retribution. It was this current disclosed propaganda system that was used to subdue the unprecedented unified black protests of the 1960s. And it's how they prevent it from happening again. If you think this is some feeble-minded conspiracy theory, it's because you've been brainwashed to think that way. Open your eyes and see our true reality. White oppressive forces controls the information and media images that are being fed into our homes and into our collective minds 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They literally own our perceptions of our collective state, and they also literally owns our interpretation of reality. If you don't think that they're exploiting this immense power that they have over us by feeding us propaganda that are designed to keep us thinking and behaving in ways that benefits themselves, you are extremely naive. And if you instead find it easier to believe that we're being controlled by silly slave syndrome myth, it's because your mind has been dumbed down. And the eyes are useless when the mind has been dumbed down. I'm telling you the Black liberating truth that many of us have been psychologically blinded from seeing. Many of us also fear the truth because of the inherent call for action that comes from accepting the truth. Believing in silly lies allows us to remain complacent and do nothing but complain. However, there's no issue more important and more pressing for Black people than realizing and addressing this one. Because it's how white oppressive forces keeps us demoralized, divided, self-loathing, and ultimately mentally enslaved. Now, within my intro, I stated I'm going to demonstrate how the mindset of many Black people that are presently being misdiagnosed as being the results of a silly slave syndrome myth are instead actually directly connected to propaganda campaigns that are being deployed against us perpetually by white oppressive forces. I'm going to do that right now, show you that our mindset is not Willie Lynch. The true reason why many Black people are now more divided than at any previous time in history and perceives ourselves as being our worst enemies is because we're constantly being bombarded with propaganda campaigns that exaggerates the issue of Black on Black crime. Most groups commit crime against their own groups. Most whites are killed by whites. It's the same with all racial groups across the board. Most crimes are committed by this where people cohabitate. It happens where people work, where people live, where people shop, where people cheat, where people borrow money, where people betrays each other, where people party at, and even where people worship. And most crimes happen among people because it's where they cohabitate. Crimes against all racial groups are committed mostly by the same groups because it's who we interact with. But the reason why the subject of Black on Black crime is being overemphasized and exaggerated within the white controlled media is to keep the Black masses demoralized, divided, and self-loathing. And it keeps our collective aggression shifted away from the white society and redirected against ourselves. It also attacks the core foundation of what bonds us as a people, and we can then be ruled over forever. In addition to the propaganda campaigns that exaggerates the issue of Black on Black crime to mislead us to believe that we're our worst enemies, we're also being constantly inundated with those reenactment TV detective shows that disproportionately showcases Black on Black crime. Race, as I said earlier, most crimes are committed by each group of the same racial group because who we interact with. But rarely do we see reenactment TV shows about other minority groups killing each other. And it's most often that we see Black on Black killing each other. And it's not because Black people commit most killing of each other at the highest rate as you've been misled to believe. The truth is that given the harsh uniqueness of the history shared between the Black population and the white population, it is deemed necessary to keep the Black population demoralized, divided, and self-loathing as a means of protecting the white society from massive unified Black retribution. Those fraudulent propaganda campaigns are also designed to make us fear each other. The white ruling class realized a long time ago that a black population that fears each other is much more easier to control than a black population that does not fear each other. The white society manipulated black people to fear each other and to believe that we therefore need the white society to protect us from each other. Ruling classes for many years have understood the power of intentionally invoking fear in their subordinate populations as a means of social control. Social scientists calls it fear psychosis. Manipulating black people to think in ways benefiting the white society is not a new concept. Throughout history, those empires that were brutally oppressive, fearing eventual retribution from the oppressed, have always manipulated the minds of the oppressed to think in ways that prevents them from unifying and seeking retribution against their oppressors. Therefore, the beliefs and perceptions held by the oppressed are never truly their own. They're always falsehoods that are beneficial to the oppressors, that have been shrewdly embedded into the collective minds of the oppressed by their oppressors without the oppressed even realizing it. I'm going to summarize the rest of my list. The reason why millions of black people reveres our oppressors, in spite of a brutally horrific history to the contrary, is nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. It's because we're constantly being inundated with movies and TV shows depicting the oppressors as being white saviors and heroes righting all wrongs. They've given their group a image makeover within our minds through their movies. And the reason why many black people believe that white people are generally healthier than black people is because we're constantly inundated with study results telling us that whites are better than us and their health results are better than us. In fact, virtually all information that we receive from the white society favor themselves over black people. Now, when you critically think, can you not see just how cartoonishly unrealistic this scenario actually is? What it does is through repetition, it instills the belief, the myth of white racial superiority into our subconscious minds. White social science determined a long time ago, doing so instills a value system into our minds that makes us more compliant with white dominance over our lives. The programming is so effective that in many cases, it causes many black people to even prefer white dominance over our lives. Our minds is not captured by slave syndrome. It is being manipulated through white society's monopoly over information that are fed into our minds. It is a reality that we must wake up to. We must not try. When we assign fairy tales and myth to our real life oppression, we are making fools of ourselves. The white society have weaponized their monopoly over information against us. Finally, summarize, the reason why many black people are said they're happy that slavery happened is because we're constantly inundated with those negative depictions of Africa. By showing us only the poorest parts of Africa and never showing us the beautiful cities, the beautiful part that outnumbers the poor parts, this makes us feel that the enslavement of our ancestors benefited us. And it also, because we feel indebted to the white society, we feel we're lucky because we've been taken away from the evil place of Africa. And this mindset also prevents us from demanding the reparations that we deserve because we feel indebted. Also, by making us feel that we are the dregs of society, we're the ones bringing down the white society, while showing us that Africa is a terrible place, we don't demand our reparation. We just stand still. We feel lucky to be here. We are responding to the information and the media images that the white society feeds into our minds. People's behaviors align with what they've been misled to believe. So white oppressive forces keeps black people believing things that keeps us behaving and functioning in ways that serves and protects the white society. This is the real black matrix. When black people speak ignorantly about ourselves, that is the most ignorant statement you can do. Because you know nothing about black people that doesn't come from white people. From white people who maintain their dominance and control over us by keeping us believing the fraudulent worst about ourselves. Whenever a black person says, man, we need to get our shit together, you are ignorant. And you are ignorant of your own ignorance because you know nothing about black people that doesn't come from white people. They own our interpretation of ourselves and they maintain their dominance and control over us by keeping us believing the least, the worst, and negative about ourselves. This is our reality. You don't know shit. You think you do. The more you awaken, the more you see the truth, the more you realize you don't know anything that didn't come from history's greatest liars. One love and peace.